Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're in Matthew chapter 7, but we're handling the second part, the final part of chapter 7. And this is really good stuff because now Jesus is um, concluding his Sermon on the Mount. So beginning in verse 12 through the end of chapter 7, he's finally finishing his thought on everything he's taught from the Beatitudes to this point. So let's go ahead and get into it. Jesus continues teaching and he says, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." And I want to highlight this point here. Jesus is saying that whatever we wish others to do to us, right, we should do to them. And by this, right, is the law and the prophets. So everything that is holy and scriptural to the Jews, Jesus is saying, is in this point here. Do unto others, right, as you wish them to do to you. And this is very important. And then, as Jesus is continuing to conclude his thoughts of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, narrow is the way. Because Jesus is bringing in new revelation. He's bringing in a holy and a righteous way. And he's warning the people that just because you see a majority of people living their life one way, it doesn't mean it leads to life. In fact, the life you're looking for is following my way and following this way. And of course, it's narrow because Jesus is beginning his ministry here and introducing to us the kingdom of heaven, which is um, at its beginning, right? Because how can the gate be wide if everything that Jesus is doing is just starting now? So Jesus is telling his people, they're telling those who listening, follow my words. They're narrow, it's difficult, but it leads to life. And don't just go to where the mass crowds are going and living their life the way they want to, because that doesn't lead to life. And then um, Jesus starts to hand out more warnings. And this is kind of how he concludes his message. He gives us like four warnings, and he gave us one with the narrow gate, and now here's another one. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. So Jesus is warning his listeners, not everybody that looks like a teacher is a teacher. Not everyone that looks holy is holy. And you have to have discernment to look at their lives and determine, are they producing good fruit? Well, what is that fruit? Well, how are they treating people? Because Jesus didn't just randomly throw in what we call the golden rule for no reason. He was giving us a foundation to say, are they treating people well? Because I don't care if they're giving a bunch of money away, if they're prophesying, if they're doing whatever in the name of the Lord. I don't care about those things. What I want to know is, how do they treat people? How do they look at people? Do they love people well? And he backs this point up because he's telling his people, discern them by their fruit. But then he backs this point up by giving us another warning and saying, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Jesus is giving a warning. One day, God the Father, the Lord, will look at people who prophesied, cast out demons, and did mighty things in the name of the Lord and say, I never knew you. And because they did it not for the people, they did it for themselves. And God wants good fruit. He wants fruit that loves people. He wants acts of righteousness for the love of people. He wants you to do everything in the name of the Father for the love of his people. So to do unto others as what they would do unto us, right? To want to do that. It's the beginning of what will eventually be when Jesus hands us the two greatest commandments, but we'll get to that point later. Jesus is giving us a clear picture of what fruit looks like. It's not doing great ministry, it's loving people well. It's treating people well. And this is really important. So Jesus' final warning is understanding his word. He says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." Jesus is concluding the Sermon on the Mount by saying, listen to my words. Listen to my words, because if you listen to everything that I'm saying and applying everything that I taught you here on this mountain, from the Beatitudes to you being salt and light, to knowing how to interpret the law, to being more righteous than the Pharisees and the Sadducees, to understanding the difference between righteous judgment and judging others harshly, and everything that we talked about in the Beatitudes. To this point, Jesus is saying, apply these words, because if you do, you'll be built on the Lord. You'll be built on a good foundation, the rock. You'll be God built, basically, and nothing created can destroy what God has built. No wind, no flood, none of that. So if you listen to his words, you're built on a good foundation. But if you choose not to apply these words and listen to him, then eventually the worries of the world and the things of this world will eventually make us crumble. And that's a warning, not to just listen to his words because they're wise and they're interesting and they make me feel good in the moment, but to actually apply them. There's hope in that. And then so much hope that nothing in this world can overcome, right, what God has built in our life. Finally, Matthew concludes, well, the end of Matthew chapter 7 ends this way because he didn't write this in verse and chapter, but with these two verses he says, "And when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as the scribes." And this is the amazing truth about Jesus, right, that Matthew's trying to bring to the readers, is that Jesus is not a teacher, just a teacher. He's not just a holy man. He is God himself, and who can teach with authority except for God himself? And he's casually but subtly revealing this to the readers, and it's really cool. But anyway, we'll stop there. This is the end of chapter 7, and tomorrow we'll dive into chapter 8. I'm really excited because now we're moving forward from the Sermon on the Mount into more of Jesus' ministry. So I hope you guys have a great day. Love y'all. Be blessed.